Hey there, and welcome back to Life Lemons and Lemonades, the podcast where we talk about tips and tricks in all trades in life, turning life's lemons into lessons one step at a time. I'm your host, DJ, and as always, I'm thrilled to have you here. Before we dive into today's topic, let's do a quick recap. Last week's episode was all about depression, anxiety, and resilience, and the small steps to keep going. We got real about the tough days and those tiny but powerful steps that can help us keep moving forward. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I definitely recommend it. There's something in there for anyone who's ever felt like they're just trying to keep their head above water, which, let's be honest, is all of us at some point. Now, let me fill you in on my week. Work has been as busy as ever, and instead of sticking to my usual journaling routine at night, I found myself writing podcast scripts instead. And let me tell you, I did not realize how much work this would actually be until I got started on episode 1. I mean, I had this whole vision of doing a video podcast too, but for now, let's just say that idea's on hold. Anyway, so far, I'm finding that recording these episodes is like my own version of a debrief session, a time for myself to reflect, share, and also learn as I go. It's simple, it's real, and it's quickly becoming one of my favorite ways to unwind. Anyway, today's topic is one that's been on my mind for a while. I mean, I'd be real. Sometimes I think about what would people remember me for? Or would I even be remembered at all? Well, I think we've all wondered at some point how to leave a lasting impression, to be memorable in a world that's constantly scrolling, swiping, and moving on to the next thing. This social media, constant notifications, and this sense of always being on the go, it's easy for people and even important moments to just slip away. And honestly, I thought it would be fun to dive into what it actually takes to make people remember you without, doing something wild or embarrassing yourself. This isn't about pulling stunts or wearing ridiculous outfits. It's about the small, meaningful actions that leave a positive mark. But before we jump in, here's a quick disclaimer. Everything I'm sharing today is a blend of my personal insights and experiences, observations, books, articles, internet dives, podcasts I've enjoyed, and some science-backed theories I found along the way. While some ideas might overlap or may feel familiar with things you've heard before, I'm here to share my own take on them. The goal here isn't to duplicate anyone else's work, but to bring my own perspective to the table. So take what clicks with you, try it out, and let's see where these ideas can take us. Alright, let me start by asking you something. Have you ever met someone who, even after a quick conversation or brief encounter, just left this undeniable impression on you? Like they walked away and something about them just lingered in your mind? Like, wow, I'd like to talk to or meet that person again. Maybe it was the way they spoke, their energy, something they said, or even just the way they looked at you and made you felt like they actually listened. Or let's flip it. Do you think people feel that way about you when you leave a room? Do you leave that little spark that makes them remember you? Maybe even think about you days or weeks later? I know it's a bit of deep question, right? But here's the thing. We're in an age where, honestly, everything and everyone can feel a little bit disposable in this world full of distractions. Studies even show that our attention spans have been getting shorter over the years. According to a study from Microsoft, our average attention span has dropped down to about 8 seconds, which, by the way, is less shorter than the attention span of a goldfish. And that study is actually almost a decade old. So with all these updates like Reels, short videos, and swipes, I couldn't be surprised if it's gotten even shorter by now. So, how do we make ourselves memorable in a world where people are forgetting things faster than ever? How do we stand out in a way that's real and not forced? So today's episode is about digging into that, not just some feel-good advice or tips. I've put together some science-backed and real-life ways to make a lasting impression. We're talking about the little things that make people remember and think about you for the right reasons, without any gimmicks, and hopefully appreciate you in a way that lasts. And here's the beauty of it. These aren't just things that help you stand out. They're things that help you show up more fully as you. By the end of this episode, I hope you'll have a few new tools and ideas that feel natural, things you can incorporate into your daily life. Because being memorable isn't about changing who you are. It's about showing up as the best version of yourself. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Making a lasting impression isn't just about charm or charisma. There's actually some science to it. For example, there's a psychological concept called the primacy effect, which suggests that people tend to remember the first piece of information they receive about someone. In other words, those first few seconds, they're gold. But there's also this recency effect, which means people also remember the last part of an interaction. So think of it like a sandwich. A strong start and a strong finish are crucial. We will mention them as we go along. Here's a fun fact. Dale Carnegie, in his classic book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, talks about how being genuinely interested in others is one of the best ways to be memorable. He says something like, you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. And you know what? That's so true. When we focus on others, they remember that feeling. We all like to be noticed, to be listened to. So if we can master that art, we're already halfway to being unforgettable. So how do we put this into practice? How do we make sure that the impression we leave is one that sticks? Today, I'm sharing some of my favorite tips for leaving a lasting impression. These aren't gimmicks or tricks, but simple, real ways to show up authentically in a world that's too often full of distractions. So let's dive in. Let's start with tip number 1. Be present and authentic. Now, I know this might sound simple, right? But in today's world where we are constantly distracted, being truly present and authentic is actually revolutionary. Think about the last time you had a conversation where someone was truly there with you, where the other person wasn't half looking at their phone, nodding along while clearly distracted or mentally somewhere else. Exactly. Just showing up fully, 100% present is rare, and that's exactly why it's memorable. Now, being present isn't just about physically showing up. It's about giving the other person your undivided attention. When you're genuinely engaged, they feel it, and it creates a powerful connection. There's actually some science behind this. Studies show that when we actually actively listen to others and engage with them, it releases a hormone called oxytocin. You might know it as the bonding hormone. Yes, this little hormone helps people feel closer, more connected, and more trusting toward each other. So when you're fully present in a conversation, you're not just being polite, you're creating a moment that sticks with them on a chemical level. And then there's authenticity. In a world where so many people are trying to fit in, stand out, or conform to trends, being unapologetically you is exactly what makes you unforgettable. We remember people who aren't afraid to be themselves, or who have their own quirks and perspectives, and who show up exactly as they are. Think about it. There's a huge difference between someone who's putting on a show, trying to impress, and someone who's just real, open, and honest. When we meet someone like that, it's so refreshing, almost like they're giving us permission to be real as well. In fact, research in psychology shows that we're drawn to people who are comfortable in their own skin because it creates a sense of safety and relatability. It's like our brains say, this person is real, I can relax and be myself here. So not only does being authentic make us memorable, but it also builds deeper, more meaningful connections. Here's another piece of the puzzle, the vulnerability. When you're being authentic, you're willing to show the real you. Sometimes that means your insecurities or things that aren't perfect. And guess what? That vulnerability creates a real connection. There is this one famous podcaster that I follow. Her name is Brené Brown. She has extensive studies on emotions, connections, vulnerabilities, and she's really good. You can follow her podcast as well, Unlocking Us by Brené Brown. Going back, she talks about how vulnerability creates what she calls shared humanity. When we are open and real, we're showing others that it's okay to be imperfect, and that sticks with people. They'll remember the courage it took for you to show up that way. And here's a fun fact. Research on first impressions shows that authenticity can often make or break how people remember us. The psychologists call this the primacy effect, which suggests that people tend to remember the first piece of information they receive about someone. And as I mentioned, they are gold. If we're authentic right from the start, whether it's sharing a quirky detail about ourselves or just showing genuine interest in the other person, we're already setting the stage for a memorable interaction. So how can we make sure we're practicing presence and authenticity in our daily lives? Let's break it down with some practical tips. First things first, put the phone down. I know it's tempting to sneak a glance, especially in those little conversations, but when you're fully engaged, resist the urge. Make the person in front of you feel like they're the only one that matters in that moment. Another big part of authenticity is also embracing what makes you, you. Those little quirks or habits that you might feel self-conscious about, they're actually what people are likely to remember most. If you're passionate about something, even if it's a bit out there, share it. That love for something unique or unusual is memorable because it's true to you. People love realness, and it's the imperfections and quirks that make us unforgettable. So here's the takeaway for tip number 1. Authenticity and presence are your superpowers. They're memorable, they build trust, and they create a connection that's hard to forget. When you show up as the real you, with no distractions and no filter, you're giving people something rare and valuable. Alright, now that we've covered authenticity and presence, so let's move on to tip number 2. It is offering kindness without expectation. Now, this might seem so basic, but that's the beauty of it. Think about the times when someone did something kind for you, no strings attached. Maybe it was a stranger who held the door for you on a rough day, or a friend who surprised you with coffee. These small moments stick with us because they're unexpected, and honestly, they are rare. When people go out of their way just to make someone's day a bit better, it would actually stand out. Kindness has this amazing ripple effect. Psychologists actually call this the helper's high. When we do something kind, it releases endorphins, the same feel-good chemicals when we laugh or exercise. And the effect doesn't stop with just one person. Studies have shown that when someone experiences kindness, they're more likely to pay it forward, continuing the chain of positive actions. So, by showing kindness, you're not only making an impression on the person in front of you, but you're also potentially spreading a chain of positivity to countless others that extends far beyond that one moment. Here's another fascinating bit of science. When we experience kindness, our brains release oxytocin, that same bonding hormone we talked about earlier. In other words, kindness literally makes people feel good on a physiological level. People may not remember every word you say, but they will remember the feeling of kindness you left them with. So how do we make kindness a part of our everyday life? First, look for small opportunities. Things like holding the door, offering a compliment, or checking in on a friend. Kindness doesn't have to be a grand gesture. In fact, it's often the simple, unexpected acts that mean the most. Another tip is to make kindness a habit. Maybe it's reaching out to someone every week or surprising a friend with something thoughtful. These small actions don't just create a positive impression on others, they also remind you of the good you're putting out into the world. The key here, though, is to give without expecting anything in return. Kindness with strings attached doesn't have the same impact. People can sense when kindness is genuine versus when it's done with a different intention. True kindness leaves a lasting impression because it's a gift. It's not a transaction. It's about making someone else's day a little brighter just because you can. So, when we offer kindness freely, without expecting anything in return, we're leaving an impression on others' lives and, in a way, building a legacy of positivity. We're showing the world that a little goodness goes a long way. And even though we may never know the full impact of our kindness, we can trust that it's out there making a difference. So, the third tip for leaving a lasting impression is all about standing by your values. In a world where opinions can change as fast as the trends on social media, having a clear sense of values and actually sticking to them is incredibly powerful. When people see that you know what you believe in and that you're willing to act on those beliefs, it builds respect and trust. And that's unforgettable. Think about people you admire, people who stand out in your mind. Chances are they're people who don't waver in their values. Whether it's integrity, kindness, honesty, or resilience, these people hold true to what matters to them, even when it's inconvenient or even unpopular. When someone consistently stands by their principles, they become someone others can rely on and respect. And consistency, by the way, is something our brains are wired to respond to. Psychologists have found that humans naturally trust and remember those who act in line with their beliefs over time. We're drawn to consistency because it makes us feel safe and secure. There's some interesting psychology behind this. Studies in social psychology have shown that people who exhibit strong core values are more likely to be remembered by others. When we encounter someone who knows their values, it taps into what's known as the halo effect, a tendency to see that person in a consistently positive light. If you know someone who's always fair, for example, you start to trust that fairness is part of who they are and you expect them to act that way in any situation. In a way, their values create a halo that makes them more memorable in our minds. Now, standing by your values doesn't have to mean big, dramatic gestures. Often, it's in the small, everyday choices that we reveal what we stand for. It could be as simple as speaking up when something doesn't sit right with you, or staying true to a commitment even when it's inconvenient. These choices might seem small, but they say a lot about who you are. And people notice these things. They might not mention it, but they remember those little acts of integrity. It's like the saying, integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching. Well, sometimes people are watching, and those moments leave an impression. So how do we figure out what our core values are? It's not always obvious at first. For me, it was only a few months ago, to be honest, that I really started reflecting on what my core values actually are. And if you're interested in doing the same, here's the approach that worked for me during those months. I started by thinking about the qualities I admire most in others. What are the things I respect deeply, things that I would stand up for, and even if no one else was around. It could be compassion, loyalty, creativity, fairness, integrity, and whatever resonates most with you. Once you identify those values, look for small ways to bring them into your daily life. If kindness is a core value for you, make it a habit to treat people with respect and understanding, no matter the situation is. If integrity is important, commit to being honest even when it's hard. These values, when practiced consistently, become part of who you are, and they're what people will remember about you. So the takeaway here is simple. If you want to be remembered, stand by your values. When you're clear about what you believe in and you live by those principles, you're not just making an impression, you're building a legacy. So let's dive into tip number 4 for leaving a lasting impression. Share your knowledge and experiences. Think about it. When someone shares something valuable with you, whether it's advice, a skill, or even just a story from their life, it sticks with you. Knowledge is one of the most meaningful gifts we can give, and when it's based on real experiences, it has even more weight. When we share a lesson we've learned or a piece of wisdom, we're not just talking, we're contributing to someone else's growth. People are naturally drawn to those who share what they know, especially when it comes from a genuine place. Studies in psychology show that when we learn from someone else's knowledge or advice, our brains respond by activating the same neural pathways involved in learning something firsthand. This is called vicarious learning, and it's why we often remember people who teach us something or give us insight into their experiences. Sharing knowledge connects us because it's a form of giving, and giving leaves an impression. And here's the beauty of sharing experiences. It's all about storytelling. Our brains love stories. They are wired for them. And when we hear a story, especially one that involves a personal challenges or valuable lessons, it engages our emotions and makes the message more memorable. There's an old saying like, facts tell, but stories sell. And it's true. Facts and advice are helpful, but when they're wrapped in a story, they become more impactful and hard to forget. Now, when it comes to sharing, the intention behind it is the key. If we're sharing to look smart or show off, people sense it, and it doesn't have the same impact. But when we share with the genuine intention to help, to offer insight, or to connect, it resonates. It's like planting a seed. You never know when someone might need that piece of advice or that story, but when the time comes, they will remember it and they will remember you. So how can we make sharing knowledge and experiences a habit? For one, don't hold back on sharing the lessons you've learned. It doesn't mean you have to preach or lecture. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, hey, I've been there too, and here's what helped me. You could also look for opportunities to teach or mentor in informal ways. If you know someone who's going through something similar to what you've experienced, reach out, share a story, offer a piece of advice, or just be there to listen. And yes, sharing experiences often means being a little vulnerable. It means saying, I've made mistakes or I've faced challenges too. But vulnerability makes you relatable, and it shows people that they are not alone. When you share from the honest, vulnerable place, it leaves a much stronger impression. People remember those who are willing to open up and be real. So takeaway is, don't underestimate the impact of sharing your knowledge and experiences. When you're open about your journey and willing to offer what you've learned, you're giving people something they can carry with them. You're creating value in their lives, and that's something they won't forget. Now it's time to move to our 5th and final tip. Keep growing and stay curious. This last tip is all about the importance of being a lifelong learner, someone who's always evolving, because in a world that's constantly changing, those who keep growing are the ones who stand out. Okay, alright, it's actually a big one. People remember those who bring new ideas, fresh perspectives, and an openness to explore the world around them. When you're curious and committed to growth, it shows. You become someone who's interesting, inspiring, and constantly evolving. And let's face it, no one forgets someone like that. There's actually some science to back this up. Curiosity activates the reward centers in our brains, releasing dopamine, the same feel-good chemical that makes us feel happy. Not only does this make curiosity feel good, but it also strengthens our memories. When we learn something new, especially something we're genuinely curious about, our brains create stronger neural pathways. This is why people who are always learning and growing tend to have an energy that's infectious. Their curiosity sparks curiosity in others, and it makes them memorable. Being a lifelong learner also shows resilience and adaptability. In a world that's consistently changing, it's easy to stick with what's comfortable and familiar. But when someone is willing to step out of their comfort zone, to ask questions, and to seek out new experiences or to learn new things, it shows a certain kind of strength. We remember lifelong learners who embrace growth because they inspire us to do the same. They're like a breath of fresh air, bringing new ideas and encouraging others to think outside the box. Curiosity doesn't mean you have to take on huge challenges or learn complex skills overnight. It can be as simple as reading a book on a topic you know nothing about, or learning a few words in a new language, or asking people about their experiences and perspectives. Sometimes the most curious people aren't the ones with all the answers. They're the ones asking the best questions. People often remember good questions. They spark conversations, open minds, and they create connections. Here's a bit about my journey with curiosity. I like to think of myself as a self-proclaimed lifelong learner, and I'm relentless about it. You have no idea the lengths I've gone to just to satisfy my curiosity. I mean, if there's something out there that sparks my interest, chances are I've either tried it, signed up for it, or it's already on my to-do list. It all started with academics, but even there, I dove in head first. I enrolled in a postgraduate course to become a data scientist. And let me tell you, I didn't exactly have a wealth of knowledge in that field going in, but I finished it in 6 months with at least a medal and so many awards, at least for show. It was thrill of, trying something completely new. And then came my master's degree to now pursuing my PhD. But along the way, I've realized that my journey in learning goes way beyond those degrees. I have dabbled in so many random skills that sometimes I can't help but laugh at myself. One day, I'm learning how to DJ. Yes, I mean like those DJs spinning and mixing tracks in the club, except that I'm just doing it at home. I'm fascinated by the process of mixing music and finding it's an incredible stress reliever for me. And then the next day, you'll find me on a badminton court. And now, I've got a pickleball on my radar. And that's just the beginning. At one point, I even decided to dive into boxing and kickboxing. And for a while, I was even committed to taking care of a plant. I won't lie, that one didn't end so well. But at least, I gave it my best shot. There's also a stack of new books waiting for me. And now I've added podcasting to the list. It started as a way to share my thoughts and connect with others, but it quickly became a whole new world of learning, planning episodes, writing scripts, editing audio. There's so much more to it than I realized. And every time I dive into something different, whether it's academics, sports, music, or yes, even this podcast, I feel this thrill of learning something new. I am discovering new parts of myself, adding layers to who I am, and finding out what really sparks joy. It's funny, but it's challenging, and sometimes it's a little random, but that's what keeps life interesting for me. So, how can we stay curious and keep growing? First, give yourself permission to be a beginner. Try something new even if you're not good at it right away. Take a class, start a hobby, or dive into a topic you know nothing about. The goal isn't perfection, it's exploration. Another great way to stay curious is to surround yourself with people who have different perspectives or areas of expertise. When you're around people who know things you don't, it naturally fuels your curiosity and inspires you to learn. Another important part to remember is that curiosity isn't just about what we can learn for ourselves. It's also about learning from others. When we ask questions, when we listen with genuine interest, we're not just expanding our own horizons. We're showing people that we value their experiences and perspectives. This curiosity about others is memorable because it makes people feel seen and heard. It creates a space for real, meaningful connections. So, the key takeaway from this tip is that when we commit to learning and evolving, we're not only enriching our own lives, but also inspiring others to do the same. People remember those who are open, adaptable, and always looking forward to grow. In a world that's constantly changing, staying curious is one of the best ways to stand out, connect, and leave a lasting impression. So there you have it, the 5 tips to making people remember you, leaving a lasting impression for all the right reasons. Now, if you're someone who actually wants to be memorable and not just for accidentally wearing your shirt inside out, go ahead and give these tips a try. Show up as your real self, throw kindness like it's going out of style, stand by your values, share those hard-earned life lessons, and keep that curiosity alive, even if it means asking too many questions than anyone expected. I mean, who said being memorable was boring, right? Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Life Lemons and Lemonades. Here's to making a real impact and being someone worth remembering. Keep pushing forward, stay curious, and let's turn those challenges into wins. Until next time, keep growing, keep going, and I'll see you in the next episode.